Hello. This is a video for David at dpreview.com, although hopefully it will be of some interest to others as well. David earlier today posted these 5 really nice pictures of birds. How he captured them all on one day, I can't imagine. And David offered me the opportunity of editing them if I wanted to, which was an offer I couldn't turn down. And I showed David what I'd done to them. I'm not that good with birds, it's not really my sort of subject. So I was a bit hesitant about that, but he liked what I did and wanted to know what I'd done. And I decided the easiest way of showing David is to make a video. So I'm going to edit one of these, this barn owl here. Now I'm going to start, I edited these in Lightroom, but David doesn't have Lightroom. But David, you do have Photoshop Elements 14, and so do I. And by happy coincidence, it turns out that I can do in Elements exactly what I did in Lightroom and do it in exactly the same way. So I'll start by going to Elements. And the first move is going to appear exceedingly strange. I'm going to say File, Open in Camera Raw. Now Camera Raw is, Adobe Camera Raw is an application that's used to edit RAW files. And David's images aren't RAW files, they are JPEG images. However, you can edit JPEG images in Adobe Camera Raw, ACR. And why I'd want to do that, I hope will become apparent quite quickly. So I'll open up that image. And what happens now is that we've got a secondary window here, and in that is the image that I've opened up, the JPEG image. And we're now in ACR rather than in Elements. Now over here on the right you can see some sliders. There's white balance stuff, temperature and tint, and then exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, whites, blacks, clarity, vibrance and saturation. If we go over to Lightroom, there's a section called Basic, and in it there is white balance, exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, whites, blacks, clarity, vibrance and saturation, which is what we saw here. And there's a second tab here called Detail, which has got sharpening and noise reduction. And if we go over to Lightroom and look at the detail, we've got sharpening and noise reduction. Not exactly the same sliders for noise reduction, but these are two products are very close to one another. Now, ACR isn't Lightroom. You can't do everything in it that you can do in Lightroom. But these two parts of it are, as far as I can tell, pretty much identical. I can put the same numbers in here as in Lightroom, slide these sliders the same amount, and I'll get the same result. So I'll go back to this Basics section. Let's have a look at this owl. It looks a little dark to me. That's my immediate impression. It looks though there's sun shining on it over here, but that's not terribly bright. And if I look at the histogram, up here on the right of the histogram, there's a gap, which suggests that there's nothing in this image which is as bright as the brightest white that it could be. So I'll start by increasing the brightness, or what ACR and Lightroom call the exposure, by a bit. And that's moved the histogram up. It's occupying some of this space, and some of the white areas, the light areas, have become lighter. I'm now going to work on the whites and the blacks. Now what's going on here with these sliders is the whites are the areas of the image that are the very brightest. There aren't any at the moment in this image that are really bright white. And the highlights are the areas that are quite bright but not the very brightest, the ones up here. Similarly, at the other end, the blacks are the ones which are very dark, and the shadows are the areas that are pretty dark but not the very darkest. Now I want to close up this gap some more, and what I'm going to do is to put the cursor on this little triangular housey sort of thing. Hold down one of these keys, and you know, I can't remember which one it is. It's that one. It's the Shift key. So I just double clicked on that with the Shift key, and what it's done is closed this gap up. In fact, you see there's a red triangle here. It's taken it a bit too far, and it's telling me that there are some overexposed areas in this image. But I'll leave it like that for the moment, and I'll do the same thing with the blacks. Hold down the Shift key and double click, and off it goes to the right. So it's now spread out the darks and the lights, and the dynamic range is being used much better. However, this area here looks too bright now, and what I'm going to do is to bring the highlights down. These are the areas that are not the very brightest but pretty bright, so I'm going to pull this right down. Now we can see some mild detail and texture in that area, so it just doesn't look a plain white anymore. And there are other things I could do, like for example I might take the shadows up a bit. I think I was looking at the eyes when I decided to do this, that I thought, that looks a very solid black there, I'm not so sure about that. And so I'll lift that by, I don't know if you can see the effect, by moving the shadows up, so it doesn't look so solidly black. I'll take it back like it was and then up again, and you can perhaps see the effect. Now the amount that you use any of these sliders is obviously a matter of personal choice as to what you like the look of. And there are other ones. There's one called Clarity here, and I quite often apply a very mild amount of clarity. It's a bit like a sort of sharpening, increasing the micro contrast, I think is probably what it's doing. And it's quite often helpful, I find, to apply a moderate amount of that, or a modest amount of it. Now you can get some visual help with some of these sliders. For example, looking at highlights, if I hold the cursor down on that little triangle, but also hold the Alt key down, I'm going to slide the highlights slider back, and we can see that more and more of it is showing as being overexposed. If I pull the highlights down, so interestingly enough, when it's in the middle, this white area here isn't actually overexposed, so it's not completely white, but in order to get it to show some more detail, I do need to pull it down some more. But if I look, for example, at the blacks, which is to do with the very darkest areas, if I start pulling that down to the left, more and more of the image becomes completely or very dark, and that's reflected in the histogram at the top as well, where it's all bunching up at the bottom. Now the other thing that I did with this image was to sharpen it a little. So if we go to the other tab, we have sharpening here, and you can decide how much of it, and the radius affects how broad or narrow the things being sharpened are. And not quite sure how to explain detail. I don't use detail very often. And you've got this masking thing. Now this is really nice as well, because one of the things I find, certainly with my insect photos, and the same may be true with other nature photos, that you want to sharpen your subject, but you may not want to sharpen, if you've got a smooth background, especially a smoother one than this, you may well not want to sharpen it for fear of bringing up noise. So if I click on this masking and hold the Alt key down, I'm now sliding the slider across, and the white areas are the areas that are going to be sharpened, so that I can restrict the sharpening to just the areas to which it is more appropriate. And then that way I can actually turn up the sharpening more than I could otherwise. By the way, if I hold the Alt key down while I'm using the amount slider, it turns to black and white, and that's true with some of these other sliders as well, so that you can have a better look at what's going on. Of course, it's very easy to over sharpen these images, so you need to be gentle with that. And that is what I did to this image. Now, as to whether it looks nice like this, well, it's, as I said, it's a matter of personal taste. But hopefully you can see from this, David, the sort of approach that I use. And a lot of it is a try it and see if you like the look of it. Now, if we go over to Lightroom, what we can do is to go through these images, and you'll be able to stop the video and to see what settings I used for each of the photos. I'm not saying this is, any of these are ideal. That one, I don't know, that area looks a bit bright to me now, but again, it will give you something if you move the sliders in ACR to the values that you can see here in the video. It'll give you some sort of starting point for what I did, and then you can alter it to make it like you like the look of. So this is the first one, and you can see what I did with the sliders here and here. The ones that are showing up in white are the ones that I've changed. The other ones I left alone. So the one that we've just looked at was this one. So those are the numbers that I used there. The next one, fabulous image, I did almost nothing to. When I did the trick about double clicking on the whites and the blacks with my finger on the Alt key, which works the same way in Lightroom, the sliders hardly moved, and I was not inclined to do much with this image anyway. It's great like it is. Here's the fourth one and the slider values that I used for it. And here's the last one. I mean, David, you've got some fabulous images here. I really like them. The FZ330, bridge camera as it is, with a small sensor, yeah, it can take nice pictures in the right hands, and your hands are pretty good for this. So there we are. That's what I did. Like them or not really relevant, but the technique is something that you can use. You can use it within Elements. Oh, I should have said, by the way, that if we go back to ACR, So let's say we finish with this one and we want to save it. We can't actually save it in ACR as a JPEG. So what you do then is down the bottom you've got this thing which says Open Image, and if you click on that you'll then be in Elements, and you can then say File Save in the normal way. Or it might be that you might want to do some other things in Elements that you can't do in ACR. For example, ACR doesn't have any local adjustments, so you can't say, well, I want this bit over here to be not as bright, or I want to clone something from somewhere else onto because there's a bit here I don't like the look of. You can't do any of that sort of thing. And there are plenty of other things you can do in Elements if you feel the need to. I have to say, for these particular images, I didn't feel the need to do anything else at all, just some simple stuff to do with the brightness, basically. So there we are. That's using ACR, which is like using some of Lightroom, using it in the context of Elements as a starting point and possibly as a finishing point for images as well. So that's it for now. Goodbye.